Good morning, America. Today I want to talk about the French Revolution. Fun, fun, fun. All right, let's get started. So the background of the French Revolution is, remember, in the 1780s, France is still a absolute monarchy. King Louis XVI and his wife, the Queen Marie Antoinette, they live in beautiful, isolated splendor in their palace in Versailles, which is on the outskirts of Paris. And remember, they moved there to get away from the mob in Paris. They rule with a rod of iron. Yet at the same time, they don't actually spend all that much time ruling because, of course, what else are the nobility for other than to do all your work for you? So King Louis spends quite a bit of his time playing locksmith. That's his favorite hobby. While Queen Marie Antoinette, well, her favorite hobby is playing peasant with her ladies-in-waiting. She has her farm on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles, and she and her ladies-in-waiting like to play peasants as if they were farmers' wives. Though, of course, her farm has little to no resemblance to a true peasant French farm at this time, more minus the whole starving to death part. Of course, this is where the famous "if they have no bread, let them eat cake" line comes from, that she allegedly said. The people of France, of course, as immortalized in Charles Dickens' novel Tale of Two Cities, are very much oppressed. They're heavily taxed. They don't have enough food to eat. But France is struggling, and not just the peasants. The French government is struggling too because of the expenses that came from the American Revolution. Remember, France was our friend and helped us out in the American Revolution. In fact, French assistance was crucial to the American victory in the Revolution. I mean, any chance to beat up on England is certainly not worth missing out on. But the American Revolution was really expensive for France. They borrowed a lot of money. They put all that on a credit card, and now those bills were due, and the French government didn't have the money to pay. Now, Louis XVI could do a lot of things. He was an autocratic ruler, an absolute ruler. He ruled by the right of God. He could do whatever he wanted to, except raise taxes. The king was not supposed to raise taxes on his own. He is supposed to talk to the French Parliament, which is called the Estates General, if he wants to raise taxes. Now, King Louis XVI and his predecessors, all the other Louises from over the years, they don't like having somebody tell them what to do. I mean, what good is it to be king if you have somebody telling you what to do, right? That's no good. So they rule as absolute rulers, and they prefer to rule without calling the Estates General. In fact, they hardly ever call the Estates General. The Estates General only meets when the king tells it to. And the kings of France had not called a session of the Estates General for almost 100 years prior to this point, prior to the late 1780s. And they got along fine without it. But Louis XVI isn't going to be able to get along without them any longer because France is facing such a severe financial crisis. They're going to have to raise taxes. That's just all there is to it. So, in 1789, King Louis calls for a session of the Estates General. Now, the Estates General is divided into three groups. We have the first estate, which represents the nobility. Then we have the second estate, which represents the clergy, the Catholic Church. And then we have the third estate, which represents everyone else. Seems like everyone else is getting the short end of the stick here, right? So, now, when the Third Estate got together, or when all the estates, and they meet separately. But when the estates got together, I think what King Louis was hoping for was that they would all get together, meekly say, "Oh, Your Majesty, we're so grateful that you've called us together. Yes, we would love to vote you a tax increase. Here you go," and then go home again. I think that's what he was hoping for. Yeah, no, didn't turn out that way. So what actually happens is the Third Estate gets together, and they're like, France is in a really bad way. The people are hungry. The taxes are too high. The bureaucracy is too much. The king is an autocrat. Things have to change. And so the Third Estate instead of meekly voting the king as tax increase, they instead offer him a list of grievances. Cahier de doléances. I don't speak French, but that's French for list of grievances. And the king is like, what is this? This does not look like a tax increase. And they're like, Your Majesty, it's a list of grievances. These are all the problems in the country. Please fix them. The king is like, now who told you that you could do anything other than raise a tax increase? And so he's not happy. And so now the Third Estate, they meet in a facility that's on the grounds of the palace at Versailles. They come in one morning to get to work, and they discover that the door of their meeting room is locked. King Louis, the locksmith king, has locked them out of their meeting place, or at least so they think. And so, but they're not going to go home just because the door's locked. Oh no, they're not done. Not even close. So they look around and they're like, well, is there anywhere else around here we can meet? Oh yeah, that's cool. There's a tennis court right next door. So they go next door to the tennis court, which is also on the grounds of the palace at Versailles. And they have an impromptu meeting at the tennis court because they're locked out of their main building. And while they're at the tennis court, they swear an oath not to go home until they have created a new constitution for France. Getting radical here. They're not going to go home till they've created a new constitution for France. And Louis is like, oh man, I liked it better when you just gave me a list of grievances. Now you want a constitution? Goodness. So they do get back into their eventual meeting room because it became clear that locking them out was not going to make them go home. And then they set to work on a new constitution for France. And they spend 2 whole years writing the new constitution. They work on it from 1789 to 1791. And they finish the new constitution in 1791. And the new constitution that they write, it envisages France as a constitutional monarchy. They're not getting rid of the king. Not yet. That comes later. Spoilers. But for right now, they are envisioning France as a constitutional monarchy. The king still gets to keep his power, but he no longer gets to rule as an absolute monarch. He has to share power with the legislature, which incidentally, the Third Estate, they're no longer calling themselves the Third Estate. They have unilaterally announced that they are now the National Assembly, not the Third Estate. So that would be the National Assembly now. And they will rule along with the king. King is like, not a fan of this. But, meanwhile, other events are taking place. Now, meanwhile, other events are afoot. Also in 1789. This is still 1789. So the next thing that happens is that the people of Paris decide to start taking events into their own hands. So, on the day of July 14th, 1789, the people of Paris come marching out of the city in a mob and top of their to-do list is to storm the Bastille. Now, the Bastille is this big, strong castle outside Paris, and it's a special castle. It's where the kings of France historically put their political prisoners. So anybody they don't like, who annoys the king too much, well, they're going to get a one-way ticket to the dungeon of the Bastille. We're talking full-on castle here, tall stone walls, moat, drawbridge, dungeon in the basement, the whole 9 yards. The mob from Paris comes out to the Bastille. Now, the Bastille is a strong castle, but the mob has the element of surprise, and the castle is not particularly well defended because they weren't expecting a mob to show up. So the mob shows up. There is a battle, might be an exaggeration, but a scuffle. And the mob is victorious. They come storming into the castle. They take the castle. The governor of the castle loses his head, literally. It winds up on the end of a pike. And the mob, they go rampaging through the castle. They go down in the dungeon, and they set loose the political prisoners. And that's the storming of the Bastille. To this day, the French celebrate July 14th as Bastille Day. It's kind of the French equivalent of 4th of July, fireworks and parades and so forth. All right. Next up on the revolutionary to-do list in August 1789 is it's time for the women of Paris to get in on the act. Now, there were women involved in storming the Bastille, but it was a mixed crowd, probably more men than women. But now, the women are going to get in on the act because they can't let the guys do all the cool revolutionary stuff. They got to get in on it too. So, in August 1789, once again, a mob sets out from Paris, this time entirely women. They march from Paris out to Versailles out in the suburbs, and they show up at Versailles, and Louis is not pleased to see them. It's kind of funny. This mob of, can you just imagine, poor Louis, he peeks out the window, and there's this big mob of women standing on his doorstep, and they're not happy, and he's like, uh-oh. And once again, the mob catches the authorities by surprise. Louis's guards are too few to be able to make a stand against them. And the women announce that they are there to take the king and the royal family back to Paris with them. Where do you go when a mob of women shows up to get you? Answer, wherever they want you to, of course. So King Louis and Queen Marie and the royal family are escorted by the mob of women back to Paris. They are put in the old royal palace. In the old royal palace right in the middle of Paris, the Tuileries. And there they are kept under house arrest for the next 2 years while the National Assembly is busy writing the Constitution. And now their lives are still relatively comfortable. They're well cared for, well fed, and so forth. But they're in effect prisoners in a gilded cage, being prisoners of the mob. Alright. Fast forward 2 years. 1791, the new constitution is done, and it envisages the king being a monarch of this constitutional monarchy, and Louis is like, I'm not a fan of this. I don't want to be a monarch of a constitutional monarchy. Where's the fun in that? And so he and the royal family decide that they are going to make their getaway. So, one fine evening when nobody is looking, the gates of the Palace of the Tuileries in Paris open and a carriage comes out. Inside is sitting an ordinary farming family that bears a suspicious resemblance to King Louis and Queen Marie. Yes, they attempted to escape in disguise as farmers. Their disguise wasn't very convincing, though. They only made it a few miles outside Paris before they were stopped at a revolutionary checkpoint. And when the rebels checked their papers, And you'll hold the lantern up, take a good look. I say, you look an awful lot like King Louis. Isn't that uncanny? It is King Louis, because everybody knows what he looks like, because guess whose picture is on the coins? All they have to do is hold the coin up. Yep, that's him, alright. So, the royal family is escorted back to Paris and put under house arrest again, this time more securely with more guards. And there's not going to be any escaping this time. Alright, now it becomes evident that Louis is not going to cooperate with a constitutional monarchy business. So, the revolutionaries set to work, the old constitution is scrapped, and so they set to work, they write a new constitution, which takes them another 2 years, until 1793, which gets them the second constitution. The second constitution does away with the monarchy entirely because it's clear that Louis is not going to cooperate. And so instead, France is going to be a republic which will be ruled by a council. And that takes us up through 1793.